Now the first step, or the first simple problem that we need to solve, is being able to execute system commands and read the result. Because so far we learned how to execute system commands using the subprocess.call function, but that allowed us to execute commands without seeing the result. Right now, we're interested into running ifconfig, but we want to see the result that ifconfig returns to us. Now, if you do a quick Google search, or if you look through the manual of Python, you're gonna come up across the subprocess module again. And this is actually the same page that contains the subprocess.call function. If you literally just scroll down, you'll see subprocess.checkoutput. This is a function that allows us to execute system commands just like subprocess.call. The only difference is this time subprocess.checkoutput, as the name suggests, will return the output returned by the command. So when we use this function to run ifconfig, we'll actually get the result that ifconfig returns. We'll be able to capture that using a variable and then print it, modify it, or do whatever we want with it in our program. Now you can see there is examples of how to use this function in here, and you can see the way to use it is very similar to the way we use subprocess.call. You have a list, each element of the list is a word in the command, and you just call it by doing subprocess.checkoutput. So let's go ahead and write this in our program and see how this is going to work. Now I have my program here. I'm actually just going to click on the minus in here beside the function name. This will allow me to hide the function code. The function code will not be deleted. I can just press on the plus to show it again. But it just makes it easier for us to focus on what we want to do. Now, I'm going to write my code here. And before I do that, I'm going to comment this line. This is the line that actually changes my MAC address. It calls the change MAC function. But there is no point of changing the MAC address right now because we're just testing this new checkoutput function. So I'm just going to press Ctrl//, or you can just type hash before the line. The line will be commented and Python will ignore this line when you run the program. Now, the function that we want to test is called subprocess dot, and as you can see, when you press the dot, you'll see all the functions that you can use from the subprocess module. The one we're interested in is the first one there, which is checkoutput. And once you press that, you're going to get a description of how to use this function, but we already know that. It's very similar to subprocess.call, which we are familiar with. All we have to do is put two square brackets to open a list, and the command that we want to run is ifconfig followed by our interface name. So it's literally ifconfig followed by interface name. Let's say you want to run it on LAN 0, so you type LAN 0. So in our script, this is going to be ifconfig in the first element between two quotation marks. Put a comma to put the second element or the second word, anything that comes after a space. And our second element is the interface. Now we know in our program, the interface in here is captured from the get arguments using the options. And we use it the same way that we used it with the checkMac function by doing options.interface. So all I have to do is just put options.interface in here as my second element. Now we're not enclosing this between quotation marks because this is a variable. We want Python to know that this is a variable so that it substitutes the value that's stored in that variable. So far so simple. When Python will reach this line, it's going to execute ifconfig followed by the interface that the person inputs as an argument. Now, this will be executed and it's all fine, but after the execution, checkoutput will return the result that ifconfig returns. But this result is not being captured or used anywhere. So we actually have to capture that result in a variable. You can call the variable anything you want, but because I like to use meaningful names, I'm going to call it ifconfig result. I'm going to say that should be equal to subprocess.checkoutput, and then I'm putting the command that I want. subprocess.checkOutput will execute this command. It will wait for the result. Once it gets the result, it's going to return it to my variable, which is called ifconfig_result. After the execution of this line, ifconfig_result will contain the value of the result of ifconfig followed by the interface that the user enters. So at the end, we want to make sure that ifconfig_result contains the value that we expect it should contain. So I'm just going to do print ifconfig_result. And that's it. Let's go ahead and run our Python code. And right now we're using I as len 0, so we're setting the interface to len 0. So when we execute this, we should see the result of ifconfig len 0. Hit enter, and as you can see, I have the result of ifconfig len 0. Now let's make sure our code is working properly. Let's try to give it a different interface. Let's give it eth0, for example. And again, as you can see, we're getting the result of ifconfig eth0. So that's it. Now step 1 is done. It's solved. We are able to execute system commands, and we are able to capture the result of that command, and then we'll be able to manipulate this result through the ifconfig_result variable.